we have seen how the global hype around the AI has distracted a little bit from critical discussions around data governance. So I think this is quite problematic because AI and other emerging technologies doesn't exist in a vacuum. So they are built on data. Data is the constitutive element, all of them. And while computational power is quite important to be discussed, it's also quite important to be combined with a discussion with regards data power. And we could see how much this was pretty much energized here at CPDP. It's important to keep that kind of venues in which data is the core element of our conversations. And without strong frameworks related to data governance, I think countries in the global south, particularly Brazil, countries in Africa and others, will remain consumers of technology, or even worse, just data providers reinforcing partners in terms of economic colonialism. And we can frame how data protection is also important to consider automated decision-making and how DPIs also fit in the conversation. So, for instance, we are paying too much attention and putting too much energy to discuss what kind of lawful grounds and our legal base would be better or would be fitted in a way to train AI models such as consent, legitimate interest, and so forth. But I would say that principles such as transparency, principles such as data quality, and mainly the effective exercise of data rights would be one of the better tools that we have right now, even before AI acts over the world, but data protection laws, in order to make those systems accountable. So think about the issue and the role being played by data quality. The whole discussion about bias, discrimination, furthering discrimination, automated discrimination is about how those data sets are not representativeness. And this is an obligation of a result, not an obligation of means, which means that we can have like a more substantive protection for data subjects and also citizenships. Accountability from the practice, from the ground. So there are a lot of interesting movements coming from Latin America, in Brazil in particularly, call it as a citizenship data production. It's called Geração Cidadã de Dados in Portuguese. People are realizing how much data sets are not representativeness of the marginalized people. So they are producing data by themselves in order to send to the state and clearly asking, this database is saying that sanitary infrastructure is covering my area, but in fact, they are not covering in my area. So, for instance, in Brazil, people that are living in favelas are collecting geolocation data plus images to send to the government and say, your database is wrong, so I have to be visible for you in order to enjoy the public policy in that regard. That's an issue of data quality at the end of the day. And they are co-building digital public infrastructures in order to have agency over data, agency over that kind of information flow. Because there in Brazil, we are facing a lot of escalation of frauds, for instance. So when people are losing agency and control of over their own information, we are also having not only a problem against the data subject, but also for business at the end of the day. So how we can think about information architecture from the user perspective and also as an architecture in which they can enjoy those data rights, and then we could see not only accountability mechanisms, but also somehow data justice, as Alison highlighted before, or what we have been called as an informational co-deliberation. It gets a little bit philosophical, but it's important. How, at the end of the day, the combination between DPIs and AI would deliver not only people as being object of information, but also subject of the information. So it's an issue also about agency.
So the example that I give right now, the conversation that is currently happening right now is that the data protection or the data governance system that in the EU is not being properly applied in this jurisdiction. So what I'm saying essentially is that all stakeholders have a responsibility to responsibly adopt the same principles, right? Irrespective of where they are working, right? So if you want to convince, for example, that an African country should adopt what is being applied in the EU, you must also be able to demonstrate that when it comes to the protection of rights of African citizens, you are going to exactly protect the right of African citizens the same way you are protecting the right of EU citizens. So if, for example, Meta protect the right of EU citizens and then comes to Africa and disrespect or disregard the right of Africans, then you want to convince Africa to adopt the same regulations or the same system as the EU. It becomes problematic because of the subject of digital sovereignty. And that is where the clash actually comes from. So we are thinking in terms of sovereignty, at the same time, uniformity in regulation, which is desirable if you think of the digital ecosystem, if you think of the gains of digital public infrastructure, if there is interoperability, if there is clear processes around cross-border data flow, etc., it's good for the ecosystem. But every country is now sensitive. Every jurisdiction is now sensitive because they feel that they are not being treated right, and so they're trying to assert some sort of sovereignty around their data governance system. So I do think that one of the things that needs to be addressed is the issue around discriminative practices in terms of how citizens of different jurisdictions are treated by data controllers, not just Meta.
I was reading just this week some news on DPI becoming a hot topic, not only the Global South, but or in India, Africa, as we are speaking, or Brazil, excuse me, and it's also in Europe. There's these MAPs. There's a report on European technological sovereignty and digital infrastructure, which is due for voting in 2 weeks. And they, the lawmakers, what they want to propose is a strong foundation for DPI, and which ranges from connectivity, cloud, software, and AI. And this is really a proposal which builds on the Eurostack industrial policy initiative. What the report says is that the European digital public infrastructure shall be founded on fair and competitive economic models, as well as just governance models, where neither private nor companies nor governments maintain centralized control. So I think that this statement really connects with your question about how can private companies such as Microsoft collaborate with government, and also, I mean, just making a note that DPIs may be owned by governments, but also by public-private partnerships. So indeed, one way that can collaborate is by these public-private partnerships, so where both parties can leverage its strengths. So governments will provide the regulatory oversight and funding, and private companies will provide the technology, knowledge, and innovation. It's also important that they align the common goals, so to make sure that there's digital inclusion, there's privacy protection, and there's technological advancement.
But let me take a step back and say that, I think the data policy framework is very different from other frameworks, and this is getting to why it potentially can provide the basis for more equitable DPIs. So, and for the application of AIs and DPIs, and also on their own. So just to emphasize that the data governance framework, the data policy framework for Africa as a governance framework, is a personal and non-personal data framework. And it's very much located in the digital transformation strategy, the African Continental Free Trade Area, and the movement towards a single digital market. So in the document, obviously the fundamental human rights imperatives, and one doesn't undermine the importance of privacy and data protection, but this is really only one component. And in the way that it's been practiced through GDPR and various things, it's very much a focus on individualized notions of privacy. And I think what we've done together with other people working in this area about bringing a data justice lens to data and how it, how that those protections and things are actually practiced is looking also at collective and systemic harms that emerge from existing data structures and the sort of enormous asymmetries of power that we have between data holders and data subjects. But as I said, very importantly, that the importance of that data, of course, there are individual data subject issues and personal data issues, but the real power imbalances come out of the economic application or the extraction of that data for economic market intelligence that's unassailable at the moment in terms of anybody else competing with that. So the heart of the African Union data policy framework is acknowledging the importance of those first generation rights, but also looking at what is being done about second and third generation rights. How are these enabling frameworks, or how are these frameworks enabling of economic rights and of course environmental rights as well?